The shuttle was small. By Keth standards, everything human was small. Cole Beckett stepped off the ramp and into a palace that could have swallowed his hometown 3 times over. The ceiling arced above him like the inside of a cathedral made by something that had never heard of modesty. Light filtered through crystal panels in the walls, casting patterns on the floor that shifted as the planet's 3 suns moved. Beautiful, massive, the kind of place that made you feel like a typo in someone else's sentence. 2 Kethguard soldiers flanked the entrance. Each one stood 8 feet tall, 4-armed, wrapped in ceremonial armor that looked like it had been grown rather than built. Their skin was a deep violet, and their eyes, 6 of them per face, tracked Cole with the kind of attention people give to insects on a kitchen counter. Cole adjusted the strap on his bag and walked between them like they were lampposts. Ambassador Lena Marsh met him at the inner gate. She was mid-40s, human, and had the particular look of someone who had been apologizing professionally for 2 decades. She wore a diplomatic uniform that managed to be both crisp and forgettable. "You made it," she said. "Wasn't hard. They gave me directions." Marsh looked at him for a moment longer than the sentence deserved. Then she turned and led him through the corridor. The briefing on the way in was short. The Keth Dominion was one of the oldest monarchies in the known galaxy. 5 great houses, 1 ruling dynasty, the Solayan family who had held the throne for longer than Earth had had written language. The Galactic Concord, in its infinite political cleverness, had arranged for a human to be assigned as a protective detail to the royal family. A gesture, a symbol of the growing relationship between species. Nobody had asked the royal family if they wanted a symbol. "The court reception is in 20 minutes, Marsh said. "Full attendance. All 5 houses have representatives present for the ascendancy rite preparations." "What do they know about me?" "That you're human, that you're here, that they didn't get a say in it." Cole nodded. That was enough. The reception hall was the size of a small lake. Every surface glowed with that same shifting bioluminescence, as if the building itself was alive and showing off. Keth dignitaries filled the space, tall, 4-armed, dressed in fabrics that moved like liquid. They spoke in low tones, and their throat markings pulsed with soft light as they talked, each color a signal Cole couldn't yet read. He walked in wearing standard human tactical dress, black, functional, built for pockets and movement, not for beauty. Against the shimmering elegance of the Keth court, he looked like someone had dropped a boot in a jewelry box. The room didn't go quiet when he entered. It did something worse. It continued as if he hadn't. Cole stood near the far wall and scanned. Exits, sightlines, load-bearing columns, the placement of guards. He cataloged it the way other people counted ceiling tiles when they were bored. Automatic, constant, and invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. Princess Vathari Solane was across the hall. She was younger than he'd expected. 4 arms like all Keth, but she held 2 of them folded behind her back in a way that looked practiced rather than natural. Her skin was a paler shade than most, almost silver, and the bioluminescent markings along her throat shifted between soft blue and green as she spoke to an advisor. She glanced at Cole once, held the look for 2 seconds, looked away. Prince Rothan Solayan, the heir, stood beside the central dais. Taller than his sister, calmer. His markings didn't shift at all, which either meant perfect composure or perfect control. He did not look at Cole, not once, which meant he was aware of exactly where Cole was standing at every moment. Then Commander Dreth Yan stepped forward. 8 feet, 4 arms, each one thicker than Cole's torso. Armor that looked like it had been through things armor shouldn't survive. His face carried the kind of stillness that only comes from a lifetime of being the most dangerous thing in any room. He stopped in front of Cole. The court noise dropped by half. "The Concord sends us a protector," Dreth said. His voice was deep enough to feel in your ribs. We would see what manner of protection this is. Translation: prove it, or be dismissed. A sparring drone was brought forward. Keth military design, four-armed, armored, programmed with close combat patterns that had been refined over centuries. It stood a head taller than Dreth. Its eyes glowed a flat, operational red. The court arranged itself to watch. This was entertainment. The small human versus the machine. A joke with a punchline everyone already knew. Cole set his bag down. The drone activated. It moved fast, faster than anything that size had a right to move. 2 arms high, 2 arms low, a striking pattern designed to overwhelm through sheer geometry. Cole stepped left, then inside. His hand found the joint, where the drone's neck met its shoulder housing. He pressed, twisted, stepped on the connecting strut, and put his full weight down. Pop! The drone dropped. 4 seconds. No sound from Cole. No expression. He stepped off the machine, picked up his bag, and looked at the nearest guard. Where are my quarters? The silence that followed was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of recalculation. Every diplomatic assumption in the room, about humans, about size, about what protective gesture meant, folded in on itself and came back a different shape. Across the hall, Vay's throat markings flared bright white. She turned away before anyone could see. Too late. Cole saw. He didn't react. Dreth said nothing. His 6 eyes stayed fixed on the broken drone. The silence from him was louder than anything the court could have produced. Marsh watched from the upper gallery, with the expression of someone who had ordered a specific item and received exactly what she paid for. Rothon noticed that expression. He filed it away in whatever palace of information he kept behind those still, unshifting markings. Cole's quarters were on the service level, small, no windows, a cot, a basin, a storage unit the size of a shoebox. The message was clear: you are a tool, and tools go in the drawer. He set his bag on the cot, ran one finger along the doorframe, top, left side, right side. He found the listening node in 11 seconds, small, Keth design, embedded in the frame at ear height, which meant it was calibrated for Keth ears, not human ones, an oversight that told him they hadn't expected him to find it at all. He left it in place. Somewhere in the palace, whoever was monitoring the feed waited for the click of removal, the small, quiet sound of a human doing exactly what a human was expected to do. The click didn't come. Cole sat on the cot, pulled out a folding knife, ceramic, white, plain, and set it on the shelf beside the basin. Then he lay back, closed his eyes, and began counting the heartbeats of a building that didn't know what it had invited inside. Dreth would learn about the listening node within the hour. He would learn that the human had found it. He would learn that the human had chosen to leave it. That choice would bother Dreth more than anything that had happened in the reception hall. A man who breaks a drone is dangerous. A man who finds a spy device and leaves it running is something else entirely. Something patient. Cole learned the palace the way water learns a building, by finding every crack, every slope, every place where things collected or drained away. Within 3 days, he knew the rotation schedules of the Keth Guard. Within 5, he knew which corridors had blind spots, and which doors could be opened from both sides. Within a week, he knew the sound the palace made at 4 in the morning, a low, living hum from the bioluminescent walls as they cycled through their rest phase. It sounded like something breathing in its sleep. He slept in 2-hour shifts, not because anyone told him to, because the math didn't add up. The gravity lift in the East Tower had malfunctioned on day 3, a power interruption, loss of stabilization for 6 seconds. They had been inside. She'd dropped 2 floors before the backup caught her. The palace engineers called it a capacitor fault. Cole pulled the maintenance log. The capacitor had been serviced 9 hours before the failure. Serviced by someone whose access clearance had been issued that same morning. On day 5, a contamination alert hit the royal kitchen. Something in the water filtration. A mineral imbalance that would have been undetectable to Kef taste, but would have caused a slow inflammatory response over several meals. The kind of thing that looks like a seasonal illness. The kind of thing that kills if no one thinks to check. On day 8, a scheduling error placed Vey in an unsecured corridor between the archive wing and the lower gardens. No guards, no surveillance. For 11 minutes, the youngest member of the royal family walked through a dead zone that shouldn't have existed in a palace with 300 years of security architecture. Each incident alone was nothing. A glitch, an error, a clerical mistake. Together they were a sentence, and Cole could read it just fine. He told no one. Telling was a tool, and tools worked best when you chose the moment. The diplomatic banquet on the 9th night was a performance of wealth and grace that would have made Earth's finest state dinners look like backyard cookouts. The table stretched the length of the great hall, a single slab of polished stone that glowed faintly from within. Keth dignitaries sat in order of house rank, their 4 arms arranged in formal dining position, their throat markings pulsing in the soft rhythmic patterns of polite conversation. Cole was seated at the far end, past the advisors, past the translators, past the servants. He occupied the last chair at the table's edge, in the margin where function met invisibility. He ate what was put in front of him. It tasted like someone had tried to explain the concept of flavor to a mineral deposit. He didn't complain. Halfway through the second course, Vey's voice carried across the hall. Human protector. The table paused. Not a full stop, more like a collective intake of breath. Addressing someone at the servant's margin from the royal position was not done. It was the dinner equivalent of shouting across a church. Cole looked up. "Tell me," Vey said. Her markings held steady blue, controlled, deliberate. "In human culture, is it customary to seat a guardian so far from the one they guard?" Every head at the table turned, some toward Vey, most toward Cole. He set down his utensil, took a moment, then answered in Keth. His pronunciation was rough, the tonal layers were off, but the words were correct, and the grammar was formal register, the dialect used between equals, not the simplified trade Keth most humans learned. "In human culture," Cole said, "a guardian sits where the sightlines are best. The end of the table sees every door." Vey's markings flickered. Just once, a crack in the composure that only someone watching very closely would catch. Cole was always watching closely. The table recalibrated. Not warmth, not yet, but a shift. The furniture had spoken, and it had spoken well. She found him after the banquet. A service corridor near the archive wing, one of the dead zones he'd already mapped and mentally flagged. She came alone, which meant she'd either dismissed her Kefguard escort or slipped them entirely. Both options told him something about her. "What are you?" she asked. No greeting, no preamble, just the question, delivered with the directness of someone raised to command rooms. "Your protector. I've seen soldiers. Kethguard train for 40 cycles. They move like weather. Large, coordinated, certain." She studied him with those 6 luminous eyes. "You don't move like weather. You move like water finding the lowest point in a room. Always settling into the place nobody watches." Cole said nothing. He let the silence do what silence does, make the other person keep talking. "So what are you?" she asked again. "A protector. What's the difference between a protector and a soldier?" He thought about it, not because he didn't know, but because the answer mattered and deserved the weight of a pause. "A soldier fights the enemy," he said. "A protector decides who the enemy is." Vey's markings shifted to something Cole hadn't catalogued yet, a deep, slow violet that pulsed once and held. She opened her mouth to respond. The gravity lift at the end of the corridor shuddered. It happened fast. The floor panel beneath them buckled, loss of magnetic alignment in the corridor's stabilization grid. All four arms reached out on instinct, grabbing whatever was closest. What was closest was Cole. He caught her, one arm around her back, one braced against the wall. Her forearms wrapped around him, two at his shoulders, two at his waist. Total contact, chest to chest. Her markings blazed white-hot against his collar, bright enough to read by. Among the Keth, physical contact of this kind was reserved for bonded partners and immediate family. It was intimate, the way a heartbeat is intimate, involuntary, private, and not meant to be shared with strangers. Cole steadied her, set her upright, stepped back. "The grid's been unstable since Tuesday," he said. "Stay to the left side. The mounting bolts are newer." That was all he said. He did not mention the contact. Not then, not ever. They pulled her arms in tight, all four of them, wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold her own bones in place. Her markings faded from white to a color she couldn't control and couldn't hide. She left without a word. That night, Commander Dreth sat in his office and read a file that had taken every favor he had left to obtain. Cole Beckett, Human Coalition Special Operations, Service Record, 14 years, Deployments, classified, Confirmed Engagements, classified, Specialized Training, classified, Psychological Evaluation, classified. The only section not redacted was the summary line at the bottom, written by a human general whose name Dreth didn't recognize. It read, "Do not assign to standard detail. Asset operates best without institutional oversight. Recommend autonomous deployment only. Note, if you are reading this, someone has already decided you need him. Trust that decision." Dreth closed the file. He looked at the broken sparring drone, still sitting in the maintenance bay, where no one had moved it. A machine designed to simulate the combat output of a trained Kethguard officer. And the human had treated it like a jar he couldn't open. Brief annoyance, simple solution, done. Dreth was not a creature built for worry. He was built for certainty, for protocol, for the clean geometry of a threat met head-on. But for the first time in his career, he was looking at a man whose geometry he couldn't map. And that, more than the drone, more than the file, more than the listening node left running in a doorframe, was what kept the commander staring at his ceiling long after the palace lights dimmed to black. In his quarters, Cole lay on his cot, with his eyes open. Beneath his pillow, a ceramic knife. In his footlocker, 3 items he'd collected over 9 days. A burned capacitor, a water filter cartridge, and a scheduling chip with a forged timestamp. 3 pieces of a sentence he hadn't finished reading. The ascendancy rite was 6 days away, and the palace was filling up like a glass under a faucet. Delegations arrived from all 5 Dominion houses. Ships docked at the orbital station above, and shuttles dropped like seeds into the palace's landing bays. Each one carrying dignitaries, advisors, military attachés, and enough political ambition to power a small star. The hallways that had felt enormous now felt crowded. Every corridor carried the sound of 4 armed figures speaking in dialects Cole was still learning to separate. He watched them all. Not the way a guard watches, scanning for weapons, checking credentials. Cole watched the way a man watches weather. He read pressure systems. He tracked which delegations walked together and which ones left space between themselves, like the GAT was load-bearing. He noted who made eye contact with the Kefguard, and who made a point of not making eye contact at all. House Vraken arrived on the 4th morning before the rite. They came early, 2 days ahead of protocol. Their shuttle was military-grade beneath the diplomatic paint, and their delegation walked in formation even when they were pretending not to. 12 officials, 8 guards, and 1 military attaché who stepped off the ramp last and stood still while the others moved around him. His name was Sorath. Keth, 8 feet tall, like Dreth, but built narrower, less like a fortress, more like a blade stood on its edge. A scar ran from above his left eye cluster down to his jaw, the bioluminescent markings along its path dead and dark, like a river that had been dammed. He wore his armor the way Cole wore his tactical blacks, not as ceremony, but as skin. Sorath crossed the arrival hall. His eyes moved in a pattern Cole recognized, because it was his own pattern. Exits, sightlines, load-bearing columns, guard positions. Their eyes met across 40 feet of polished stone. Neither looked away, neither nodded, neither moved. It lasted 3 seconds, which in the language of people like them was a full conversation. I see you. I see you seeing me. We'll talk later. Not with words. Cole filed it. Sorath filed it. The arrival hall continued around them, unaware that the 2 most dangerous people in the building had just introduced themselves. That afternoon, Cole walked the palace's security architecture. Every corridor, every junction, every access point between the public ceremonial spaces and the private royal quarters. He moved at a pace that looked casual, and covered the entire complex in 4 hours, a feat that would have taken a Kethguard team 2 days, because Kethguard teams followed procedure, and Cole followed gravity. He found 11 critical failure points. Not small ones, not theoretical vulnerabilities that needed 3 things to go wrong at once. Real, structural gaps, places where the security design trusted tradition instead of physics. A ventilation shaft that bypassed 2 checkpoints. A maintenance tunnel that connected the lower palace to the ceremonial chamber with 0 surveillance coverage. A power junction whose failure would kill lighting and communications in the entire East Wing for 90 seconds, long enough to move a small team anywhere they needed to be. He compiled the list. No commentary, just locations, descriptions, and the time required to exploit each one. Then he went to Dreth. The commander's office was exactly what Cole expected. Organized, sparse, and built for a person who believed that clarity of space produced clarity of thought. Dreth sat behind a desk made of the same glowing stone as the rest of the palace. He looked at Cole the way he always looked at Cole, with the careful blankness of someone still deciding what category to file him under. Cole set the list on the desk. Dreth read it. His 6 eyes moved down the page. His 4 hands stayed flat on the surface, perfectly still. He reached the end, read it again, then looked up. The silence lasted long enough for Cole to count his own heartbeats. 7 of them. 9 of these can be addressed before the right, Dreth said. I know. The other 2 are political. I know that too. Dreth's jaw tightened. The 2 political vulnerabilities were access corridors controlled by House Vraken's delegation, spaces granted by tradition, protected by treaty, and impossible to secure without creating a diplomatic incident that would overshadow the right itself. You're telling me you found the door, Dreth said, and it's a door I can't lock. Cole didn't answer. He didn't need to. The list said everything. Dreth fixed 9 of the 11 points within 20 hours. He did it quietly, without filing reports, without going through channels. He moved his best people into position, and restructured patrol routes using authority he technically didn't have. Nobody questioned him. When the commander of the Kethguard moved with purpose, the palace moved with him. 2 unlocked doors in a building full of people Cole was increasingly certain wanted to walk through them. 3 nights before the rite, Vey found him on the western terrace. The terrace overlooked the city below, a sprawl of bioluminescent towers that pulsed in slow, coordinated rhythms, like a city-sized organism breathing in its sleep. 3 moons hung above in a loose triangle. The light they cast was silver-blue and turned everything it touched into something that looked like a memory of itself. Vey stood beside him at the railing. She didn't announce herself. She just appeared. Forearms folded, markings dimmed to a low, steady amber. Resting mode. As close to unguarded as he'd seen her. "Have you ever killed anyone?" she asked. Cole looked at the city. "Yes." "Did it change you?" He considered the question. Not the answer. He knew the answer. But whether the answer was something she was ready to carry. "It didn't change me enough," he said. They turned to look at him. All 6 eyes. The amber in her markings shifted, cooled, became something darker. She didn't ask what he meant. She knew she didn't have the context for it yet, and she was smart enough not to pretend. They stood in silence for a while. The moons moved. The city breathed. "Something is wrong," she said, not a question. Cole looked at her. "I'm not a fool," she said. "The lift, the water, the corridor. I've been adding the numbers, and they don't come to 0. He said nothing. But the quality of his silence changed. It went from closed to open, from a wall to a door. "You already know," she said. "You've known for a while. Knowing isn't the same as proving. And proving isn't the same as stopping." He looked at her for a long time. This girl, this princess with 4 arms and a throat that broadcast every feeling she tried to hide, had just drawn a line he hadn't expected her to find this early. "No," he said, "it isn't." The next morning, Rothan came to Cole's quarters. The prince filled the doorway the way his sister never could, not just with size, but with a presence that had been built by a lifetime of being watched by billions. His markings were flat, controlled, but his lower 2 hands were clasped behind his back, and Cole could see the knuckles shifting, a nervous habit the prince probably didn't know he had. "One of my advisory council members," Rothan said, no greeting. "Talith. She redirected the corridor security on the day my sister walked through an unsecured passage." Cole waited. "I confronted her. She claimed it was a clerical error, but the access code used to change the schedule was hers." Rothan's voice stayed level, but his knuckles went white. "She has served my family for 19 cycles. People don't betray families they've served for 19 cycles because they wake up one morning and decide to," Cole said. "Someone offered her something, or threatened her with something. Either way, she's not the architect. She's a brick." Rothan absorbed that. His markings didn't shift, but something behind his eyes did. A door closing on a room he'd thought was safe. "I came to you," Rothan said, "not to Dreth." "I noticed. Does that tell you something?" "It tells me you trust the person who found the problem more than the person who was supposed to prevent it." Rothan stood there for a moment longer. Then he nodded once and left. That evening 3 men met in a storage room on the service level. A Keth prince, a Keth commander, and a human who slept with a ceramic knife under his pillow. They did not like each other. What they shared was simpler and more urgent than liking. They shared arithmetic, and the numbers pointed down. The night before the rite, Cole walked the perimeter alone. Every guard post, every access point, every one of Dreth's new patrol routes, and every one of the 2 gaps they couldn't close. He stopped at a junction in the lower palace, maintenance level, the corridor that led to the tunnel he'd flagged on his list, the one that connected to the ceremonial chamber with 0 surveillance. He crouched, pressed his palm flat to the floor. Vibration, faint but steady, mechanical, coming from below, from a space the palace blueprint said was solid foundation stone and nothing else. Someone was under the palace, and they were building something. Pulled out a comm unit. Not the Keth-issued one, but a human encrypted channel that Marsh had given him on day 1, with instructions he hadn't questioned. "Confirm," he said. A pause. 3 seconds. Marsh's voice came back, stripped of every diplomatic softness he'd ever heard her use. "Confirmed. It's tonight." Cole closed the channel, put the comm away. stood alone in a corridor beneath a palace that was about to learn what a human protector was actually for. He didn't go back to his quarters. He wouldn't need sleep for what was coming. What he needed was the knife, the sidearm, and the geometry he'd spent 3 weeks memorizing. The building hummed around him, alive, unaware. The ascendancy rite began at dawn, and dawn on this world came in 3 colors. The first sun rose gold. The second followed 10 minutes later in pale violet. The third, the smallest, the oldest, brought a red so deep it turned the palace walls the color of a wound just starting to heal. Together they flooded the ceremonial chamber with light that moved, shifted, and breathed like something holy and half alive. The chamber itself was the largest enclosed space Cole had ever stood in. A perfect circle, 200 meters across, with a domed ceiling that opened to the sky through crystal panels. Tiered seating rose in concentric rings, thousands of Keth dignitaries arranged by house, by rank, by centuries of tradition that dictated who sat where and what it meant. Billions more watched through broadcast relays across the Dominion. This was not a ceremony. This was the moment. This was the heartbeat of a civilization, and the galaxy was counting the beats. They stood at the center. She wore white, ceremonial fabric that clung and flowed and caught the triple sunlight, until she looked less like a person and more like a candle someone had lit inside a diamond. Her 4 arms were arranged in the formal position of declaration, 2 raised, 2 open, palms facing the assembly. Her markings pulsed gold, steady, regal, real. Cole stood at the edge of the chamber, 30 meters from the nearest entrance, positioned where Dreth's new security grid placed him, visible enough to satisfy protocol, far enough to be irrelevant. Except Cole was never irrelevant. He was reading the room the way a conductor reads an orchestra, tracking every instrument, waiting for the note that didn't belong. Her voice carried through the chamber, amplified by the architecture itself, the stone designed to hold sound the way a cup holds water. The words were old, older than the palace, older than the dynasty. They spoke of duty, of continuity, of the unbroken chain between those who ruled and those who would rule after. For one moment, Cole watched. Not the exits, not the sightlines, her. Then the lights went out. It didn't happen all at once. That was the craftsmanship of it. The communications array dropped first, a soft death, like a candle going out in another room. The broadcast relays flickered and died. Then the secondary lighting in the outer rings failed, pulling the edges of the chamber into shadow. The primary lights held for 3 more seconds, long enough for confusion to arrive before panic. And then they too went dark. The ceremonial chamber, a space designed to hold thousands in ordered reverence, became a stone box full of blind people. Cole moved. He'd memorized the chamber's layout to the centimeter. He didn't need light. He needed the map in his head, and the count he'd been running since he pressed his palm to the floor the night before. 14 seconds from power failure to backup generator activation. 90 seconds from backup activation to full lighting restoration. That window, those 90 seconds of half-light and confusion, was the kill zone. He was already running when the first Kethguard officers turned. Not toward the threat, toward each other. 3 of them in positions along the chamber's inner ring. Officers who had served the Royal Guard for years, whose loyalty had been certified and recertified by Dreth's own protocols. Stepped away from their posts and drew weapons. Not outsiders, not mercenaries. True believers, House Raken loyalists, planted so deep they'd grown roots. The first one died before he understood what had hit him. Cole came from behind, low, fast, wrong-angled, and put the ceramic knife through the gap between the officer's neck armor and helmet seal. The Keth body was stronger than a human's, thicker bone, denser muscle, but joints were joints, gaps were gaps, and Cole had spent 3 weeks learning exactly where the architecture of a Keth body failed. The second officer turned and saw Cole standing over the first. His 6 eyes went wide. He raised his weapon, a pulse lance, standard Keth guard issue, designed for stopping things much larger than a human. Cole was already inside the weapon's reach. He grabbed the lance's barrel with his left hand, redirected it upward, and drove the knife into the officer's lower arm joint with his right. The officer buckled. Cole took the lance, reversed it, and used the stock to break the officer's helmet seal. Down. The third officer ran. Cole let him. He'd run straight into the patrol Dreth had repositioned 2 days ago. That was the thing about geometry. It worked in both directions. 14 seconds had passed. The backup lights flickered on. Dim, red-tinted emergency spectrum. The chamber swam in crimson half-light. Thousands of Keth were on their feet, forearms reaching, markings flashing in distress patterns that turned the crowd into a sea of panicked color. Then the floor opened. The maintenance tunnel, the one the blueprints said didn't exist, split the chamber floor along a seam that had been cut weeks ago and sealed with a compound designed to fracture under a specific vibration frequency. The same vibration Cole had felt through his palm. Sorath came up first. He rose through the gap like something surfacing from deep water. Smooth, controlled, a blade unsheathing itself. Behind him, a strike team. 8 Keth soldiers in Vraken combat gear, moving in the tight practiced formation of people who had rehearsed this moment until it was muscle memory. Vey was 15 meters from the breach point. Rothan was 30. The ceremonial platform between them had become an island in a sea of chaos. Cole reached Vey first. Not frozen, standing. Her markings were cycling through colors so fast they blurred together into white. Her forearms were drawn in tight against her body. She had never seen real violence. She had never seen a person die. She had never stood in a room where the air tasted like ozone and blood, and the particular electricity of things going permanently wrong. Cole put himself between her and the breach, back to her, facing the gap in the floor. Knife in one hand, stolen lance in the other. "Behind me," he said. His voice was flat, calm, the voice of a man doing math, not feeling feelings. "Stay behind me. If I fall, run left. Only left. Do you understand?" She nodded. She was shaking with all 4 arms. Sorath crossed the chamber floor. His dead-marked scar caught the red emergency light and turned it into a line of shadow across his face. He moved the way Cole had expected. Fluid, precise, trained in a close combat doctrine that had dominated Keth warfare for 600 years. A doctrine built on the assumption that forearms always beat 2, that size always beats speed, that tradition always beat improvisation. Cole stepped forward to meet him. The fight lasted 12 seconds. It felt longer. Every second carried the weight of a decision. Sorath's reach versus Cole's angles. Sorath's power versus Cole's refusal to be where the power landed. The Keth doctrine was built on geometry, on the mathematical certainty that 4 striking points overwhelmed 2. Cole didn't fight the geometry. He broke it. He moved to places the doctrine said nothing could be. Too close, too low, too wrong. He fought like a system error in a program that had never been debugged. Sorath's upper right arm came down like a hammer. Cole wasn't there. He was inside, past the arm, his knife finding the same joint gap he'd learned on the others. But this time, it was Sorath, who was faster, who twisted, who almost got clear. Almost. The knife caught Sorath's lower left arm at the elbow. He buckled. Cole stepped past, drove his shoulder into Sorath's center mass, a hit that shouldn't have moved something that size but did, because it landed at the exact fulcrum point where balance fails, and Sorath went down, hard. Stone cracked under the impact. Cole stood over him, bleeding from a cut across his shoulder he hadn't registered. The stolen lance pointed down. Sorath looked up at him with 6 eyes full of something that wasn't fear. It was recognition. The look of a professional watching another professional operate at a frequency he'd never encountered. Behind Cole, the strike team hesitated. Their leader was down. The geometry they'd trained for didn't account for this. That hesitation lasted 4 seconds. Long enough for Dreth. The commander came through the east entrance with 20 loyalist Kethguard at his back, moving in the full contact assault formation that the Keth military had perfected over centuries. The strike team folded in under a minute. The chamber stabilized. The red light held. Thousands of Keth stood in silence, watching the aftermath of something their civilization had spent generations believing couldn't happen here. And in the center of it, Dreth stopped. He saw Cole, small, human, covered in blood, most of it not his, standing between the princess and 6 bodies in a room that had just tried to eat its own royal family alive. Their eyes met. Dreth bowed. Not the diplomatic bow, not the bow of protocol or political necessity, the one reserved for warriors, who had earned something that rank and tradition could not give, and ceremony could not take away. Cole didn't bow back. He turned to Vey, checked her eyes, checked her breathing, checked her hands, all 4 of them, for injury. "You're okay," he said. She nodded. Her markings were still white. Her body was still shaking. But she was alive, and the man who'd kept her that way was already scanning the room again, counting exits, reading the geometry of a building that had just learned, the hard way, what the humans had sent instead of a gesture. The palace was quiet, in the way that places are quiet after something has broken inside them. Not peaceful, not resting. The silence of a body checking itself for wounds it hasn't found yet. 3 days had passed since the Ascendancy Rite. House Vrykin's delegation had been seized, their ships impounded at the orbital station, their political standing within the Dominion reduced from ancient noble house to a word no one wanted to say out loud. Sorath was alive, held in the deep cells beneath the palace, his 4 arms bound in restraints designed for creatures twice his threat level. The restraints had been Cole's suggestion. Dreth hadn't argued. 14 conspirators had been identified within the palace itself. Staff, officers, 1 senior advisor. People who had eaten at the royal table, walked the royal corridors, breathed the royal air for years, and had spent every one of those years building the architecture of a betrayal, so patient it had grown roots in the foundation. Rothan had taken it the hardest. Not the attack, the math. The realization that loyalty was not a substance you could test for, that it lived in the same body as treason, and that the difference between the two was sometimes nothing more than which offer arrived on which morning. He didn't show it. His markings stayed flat. His voice stayed level. But Cole noticed that the prince had stopped clasping his hands behind his back. He kept them visible now, open, as if he needed to see his own fingers to trust what they were doing. The Keth High Senate convened on the 2nd day. Emergency session. Full assembly. Every house represented. Every seat filled. The chamber thick with the particular tension of powerful people realizing that the ground beneath them was softer than they'd believed. Cole was asked to testify. The request came through Dreth, who delivered it with the careful neutrality of a man passing a live grenade to someone he hoped knew what to do with it. No non-Keth had ever addressed the High Senate. The invitation was not tradition. It was the opposite of tradition. It was what happens when tradition fails and the people left standing need answers from whoever is still standing with them. Cole entered the Senate chamber in the same tactical blacks he'd worn every day since he arrived. The same boots, the same flat expression that gave away nothing and invited nothing. He stood at the testimony platform, a raised circle of stone designed for someone twice his height, and looked up at 500 Keth senators who looked down at him with 6 eyes each. He gave his account in 9 sentences. He described the communications failure, the turned officers, the breach through the maintenance tunnel, the engagement with the strike team, the confrontation with Sorath, the arrival of Commander Drek's loyalist force, the securing of the chamber, the status of the royal family, the resolution. 9 sentences, no adjectives, no commentary, no description of the 4 Keth soldiers he'd killed in a corridor that had no witnesses and no cameras. No mention of the ceramic knife, or the methods he'd used, or the specific anatomical knowledge required to do what he'd done to bodies built stronger than his own. The Senate chamber was silent for 60 seconds after he finished. Because of the shape of what he'd left out, the absence was louder than any detail could have been. 500 senators sat in that silence and understood, perhaps for the first time, that the human had not given them a report. He had given them a border. Everything on his side of it was his. They were welcome to their side. Dreth found him afterward, in the maintenance corridor, where Cole had first felt the vibrations beneath the floor. The corridor was sealed now. Dreth's engineers had filled the tunnel with structural foam and reinforced the access points. The gap in the palace's body had been closed. The scar would remain. "How did you know?" Dreth asked. No posture, no rank, just one professional asking another. "Your palace is beautiful," Cole said. "That's the problem. Beautiful things assume they won't be broken." He stood there for a moment, his forearms held at his sides in a way that looked almost human, loose, unguarded, tired. Then he reached behind his back and produced something Cole hadn't seen before, a blade. Keth Guard issue, not the standard weapon, but the officer's blade, the ceremonial one, the one carried by commanders, given only to those who had proven themselves in defense of the royal house. The metal was dark, almost black, with bioluminescent veins running through it that pulsed faintly in the corridor's low light. "This has not been offered to a non-Keth in the recorded history of the Dominion," Dreth said. Cole looked at it, looked at Dreth. He took it the way he took everything, quietly, like it weighed more than it looked. Rothan addressed the Dominion the following morning. Full broadcast, every relay restored, every channel open, billions watching across a civilization that was still holding its breath. He didn't need to. He described what he had seen, a single figure standing in a doorway, smaller than everyone in the room, placing himself between a threat and the person he was assigned to protect. No hesitation, no calculation, no moment where the decision was made, because the decision had been made long before. Somewhere, in the architecture of a species, the Dominion had underestimated. "We asked the Galactic Concord for a gesture," Rothan said. His markings were steady for the first time since the attack. "We expected a symbol, something decorative, something that would stand in our halls and remind us that the galaxy was full of species smaller and younger than ourselves." He paused. The broadcast held the silence. "We misunderstood what the humans sent us. We thought it was a gesture. It was a promise." Cole's departure was scheduled for the 5th day. Shuttle prepped, bag packed. The listening node in the door frame, the one he'd found on his first night and never removed, sat in the empty room like a question no one had answered. They found him in the hangar bay. She walked across the landing platform with the kind of purpose that only comes from someone who has rehearsed a moment in their head and is now terrified of the version that's actually happening. Her markings were shifting, slow, unsteady, cycling through colors Cole had spent weeks cataloging. Blue for composure, green for curiosity, amber for rest, white for shock. This was none of those. This was a color he'd seen once before, on the terrace, under 3 moons. In the moment after she'd asked him a question, he'd answered too honestly. A deep, warm violet that didn't pulse or shift. It held, steady as a second heartbeat. She stopped in front of him, close enough that he could see the faint luminescence under her skin, the light that lived inside her the way heat lives inside a stone that's been sitting in the sun. She held out her hand, lower left, the one closest to the body, the one the Keth used for things they meant more than they can say. In her palm sat a small crystal, bioluminescent. It glowed with the same deep violet as her markings, matched to her specifically, keyed to her biology, alive with her light. Cole looked at it, looked at her. "You know I can't read this," he said. "I know," she said. Her markings held steady. That color, that impossible, unnamed, untranslatable color that the Keth language had a word for, and human language didn't. A color that meant something between gratitude and grief, between farewell and not farewell, between the end of a story and the refusal to let it end. He took the crystal, held it for a moment in his palm. Then he put it in his jacket. Left side, over the pocket, close to the architecture. She smiled. Small, real. The kind of smile that cost something. Neither of them said goodbye. Goodbye was for people who believed in endings, and whatever this was, it didn't have the shape of something that ended. Marsh met him at the shuttle ramp. She wore the same diplomatic uniform she'd worn the day he arrived. Crisp, forgettable, designed to disappear into the background of whatever room she occupied. She handed him a dossier, thin, sealed, standard Concord issue. Cole broke the seal, read the first line. His expression didn't change, but he set the dossier down more gently than was necessary, the way a person handles something fragile they hadn't expected to find. "They have kids?" he asked. "They have a whole dynasty," Marsh said. Cole looked at the dossier for a moment longer. Then he picked up his bag, slung it over his shoulder, the one that wasn't still healing from Sorath's strike team, and walked up the ramp. The shuttle lifted off. The palace shrank beneath him, that enormous, beautiful, broken and healing thing that had spent centuries assuming it was safe because it had never been tested. The 3 suns painted its walls in gold and violet, and the deep red of things that survive. Somewhere inside it, a princess touched the wall of a service corridor, the place where a human had leaned for 43 days. The stone was cool. Keth architecture didn't hold warmth. It was designed to regulate, to balance, to let nothing linger. But Vey pressed her hand flat against it anyway. And she could have sworn, for just a moment, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, the wall was warm. She pulled her hand back, held it against her chest, all 4 arms drawn in close. She didn't tell anyone why she was smiling. In her throat, the markings held that deep, steady violet, the color that didn't have a human word. The color that meant, this one changed the shape of things. This one left a mark the stone remembers. Above the planet, a shuttle carried a man with a ceramic knife, a Kethgard blade, and a crystal that glowed against his chest like a promise someone had made in a language he couldn't speak, but understood completely. Cole Beckett leaned back in his seat, closed his eyes, and began counting the heartbeats of the next building that didn't know what was coming. Somewhere in the galaxy, another dynasty slept soundly,